know from which kind of the side of the world are you today. So welcome to the panel session on Green Digital Action, International Standards, Harnessing Technology for Climate Solution. It's a pleasure for us that you are here with us. This is as you know, the Green Digital Action has a pillar on green standards, and the green standards pillar is divided in the World Standards Cooperation, but also on how we implement international standards. So to start, I would like to give the floor to our distinguished guest, Mr. Seiso Onoe, Director of the Telecommunications Standardization Bureau from ITU.
Hi, good afternoon. Well, good evening. Good evening, everyone. And very warm welcome to the Standards Pavilion again and again and again. Actually, I see some people in the previous session, but give me just 3 minutes to opening remarks. The standards pillars of our Green Digital Action activities aims to help everyone take full advantage of standards as tools for climate action. Yesterday, we looked at energy efficiency and key development in supporting standard work. This afternoon, together with our partner IEC and ISO, we discussed the importance of inclusive standards. Both of these discussions look at how we can ensure that the standards benefit everyone, access all industry sectors and regions of the world. This session is also very much about ensuring that the standards help everyone to achieve their climate action. We will explore the action plan that we announced at COP28 to support standards development and implementation. This action plan can help us to meet demand for new standards. For example, we are working on emissions and energy efficiency measurements specific to AI, addressing a standards gap identified last year. We will also look at how we could support the implementation of standards by creating guidance on the value of different standards to different industries, products, or processes. I thank our speakers and everyone joining us today for sharing your success stories and hopes for the future. I firmly believe that the spirit of collaboration and consensus that drives standard development is exactly the spirit we need to achieve a sustainable future. All industries are transforming with the help of digital technologies, creating opportunities for the digital tech industry to be a powerful force for climate action. That's why ITU is so invested in building bridges between different areas of expertise. We share this goal with our partners supporting our Green Digital Action activities. This session will help us to continue moving in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Onoe. Now, I'm going to give the floor to our great leader. You know, the Green Digital Action with the different pillars have a leader. Because it's also a partner-led initiative. So we needed someone very dynamic. And we had a very good leader, which is Ahmed Rashad Harriat. He's the leader of the Green Digital Standard pillar. So I give you the floor. You will see his energy. He's a good energy for the climate.
Thank you, Reina. Thank you, everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly, not the music. Music is later. Okay, so we're going to have a very interesting panel. And I think the first thing, I don't want to give a opening speech and talk about the pillar first. Let's just invite all the speakers on board, and then we can have a quick one. So talk about the dynamic discussion. So we are really, really happy. We have 4 speakers. We have Sarah Bellin, Senior Digital Development Specialist from the World Bank. Sarah, please come over. And we have Safdar Nazir, Senior Vice President, Public Sector, Middle East from Huawei. And we have Marco Serena, Chief Sustainable Impact Officer from Private Infrastructure Development Group. Thanks, Marco. And we have John Manuel Canet, Senior Manager, Climate Biodiversity, Orange Group. Thank you very much, John Manuel. So I know we are at the end of the day. I know we need to be quick, but into the point and very impactful was this session. So I'll give just a very quick 1-minute explanation of what we did and what we're doing here. So we have the GDA, the Green Digital Action, which is a partners-led initiative, as Reina was mentioning. More than 40 partners are in this digital action, Green Digital Action. It started last year. We had a great work in COP28, and now we are actually working more and more building on this work for this COP29, and it's going to go for 1 more year, hopefully for COP30 and even more. This pillar is part of GDA standards pillar. We focus on standards, and we also focus on how to adopt standards. So we had the previous session about the standardization, which had ITU, ISO, and IEC, and also all the other partners talking about standardizations and the green standards and what we can do with green standards. This session is a little bit more practical on that. So we're trying to build on this by interfacing this kind of standardization work to the industry, to governments. How can we make sure that this kind of standards are actually meaningful, well adopted, and well promoted? So the question here would be, what did we do in this green digital action standards pillar? We identified green standards that have been adopted in international organizations, and we also have identified where to place them and label them under specific categories. And we try to promote and work with multi-stakeholders across the digital ecosystem, like financing institutions, like operators, like vendors, like governments and international organizations. So again, to kind of blend this discussion into the actual practical work that we're doing, we have kind of all the representation coming on stage for this session. So maybe I'll start with international organization, with World Bank. So I'll start with you, Sarah. Sarah, how can the World Bank help bridge gaps for countries where compliance to green standards can be a bit challenging in terms of economic viability?
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Sarah Ballon, and I'm a global lead on green digital in the World Bank. I work in the digital vertical of the bank, and we work together with client governments on digital transformation projects. So what we do is we invest together with client governments in a lot of different things across the digital ecosystem, including a lot of digital infrastructure. And back to your question, so you're asking, how can standards be implemented if there's an economic overhead to doing that? And maybe let me start by challenging that assumption. Because what I see in my work is that a lot of times implementing green measures is actually also makes a lot of business sense. And let me give you a few examples. So we, for example, work with a lot of telecom operators, and energy efficiency measures also drive down costs of energy, which is one of their big operating expenses. So it makes business sense. Another example is last mile connectivity. A lot of times previously, it was generators using diesel that were being used. Now a lot of telecom operators transitioning to solar-driven diesel generators. And that means you don't have to drive out with diesel as often. And so it's again, it makes business sense. And why is that important for us? For us, at the end of the day, our goal is digital transformation and bridging the digital divide. So if green comes at a cost of inclusion, it's a big problem for us. So we see as our finest task to figure out what are the sweet spots where implementing green standards also make business sense and is not at the cost of inclusion. And that sometimes means you maybe don't implement the full standard, but you start somewhere and have to adapt that to a local context. And that's what we do in our projects. We invest, so we have a government will have a goal of X digital investments, and we help them then identify the right standards and how to use them. So
So that's a great point. So it's not only a cost; it's an investment. That's what you're saying, and how can we align both together? Maybe I will take from this and go to an actual practical implementation of that with Marco here. So Marco is from the Private Infrastructure Development Group. So maybe Marco, if we're having this kind of setting the scene that Sarah mentioned about this balance between the economy and the green standards or sustainability and economy. So how can you ensure the infrastructure investments can actually align with the green standards while maintaining the economic viability for developing regions? And if you can give us a little bit of idea about also what you're doing in terms of like private infrastructure development. Yeah.
Thank you, and thanks for having me today. I'll start from there. So the Private Infrastructure Development Group is an infrastructure developer and investor in Sub-Saharan Africa mainly, and South and Southeast Asia. And we are an impact investor, so we're trying to take a bit more risk than the private sector would take commercially in order to take the private sector with us. So we've done about 250 projects in the infrastructure space. About 40% is energy, and telecom is probably our second together with transport there. So the first message that we've got is that actually the telecom and digital space is an investable proposition at the moment, especially at the moment in which other infrastructure projects are lagging. This is actually one of the driver of capital flows into Africa at the moment. I'm not saying it's easy, but it is important. In terms of the type of things that we do, so we are really trying to promote the best possible standards. We see that best available technology and international standards are at times, or actually often, above the national standards. And so there is a constant conversation with the sponsor and with the investor about why should we adopt that if it is beyond what the national government is asking me to do. So part of our role is to ensure that those standards are upheld, because these projects will be more investable in the future. I think there are a lot of good examples. I'll give two because I've got Orange in my left, and one of that is actually we had a fruitful cooperation in West Africa with Sonatel, with your subsidiary there, on raising bonds for expanding 3G, 4G to rural areas and replacing diesel in the tower with solar as well. There is a case, and I'll let you talk about the standards of the company, where you got an international company with a strong commitment, and so there was not much negotiation on that. There was alignment, but it was done at a level above the local standards, so that will actually raise standards in the region. We've got other examples of working with smaller companies on the continent, as well as data centers as well. And there we had to incentivize the adoption of new solutions that go beyond the national standards, effectively with technical assistance that help us do some studies in order to see what we can do on energy generation, on biodiversity and nature in particular, and how can that be possibly brought into the design of the project and the viability of the overall project. But that varies a lot. I think one last point, if you allow me, is I think there is a double whammy. The investors and companies who work at it by international standards in developing economies will actually raise the other standards and generate multiple benefits. So it costs more. Is done beyond what the competition is doing, is creating an added benefit, but none of this is actually priced in the transaction and in the cost of capital. So that's one of the challenges, I think.
No, thanks, Marco. I mean, very, very good points, and it's a very interesting way of seeing things from the other way around. Like you're starting from the need, not from the standard that drives, like it's not a top-down approach, it's more like a bottom-up, where you can see the local thing. But it's also very interesting that you're saying that the global standards or technical standards can sometimes suppress the local standards. And you mentioned Orange many times. Maybe it's a good way to go to Jean-Manuel right away. So Jean, I mean, I know you're not only one of the most, I would say, the most operator that works on sustainability and really takes care of this as one of the center policies that you have. But also you're very active in the Green Digital Action. You are the co-lead of the GHG pillar. So my question to you is, what challenges and opportunities do you see in harmonizing GHG accounting in digital ecosystem?
Okay, good afternoon, good evening to all. Thanks very much for inviting me here. Very pleased to be with you and to be together today. So for us, it is crucial that we have common standards because, as you mentioned, we need common rules of play. And we need common rules of play from the point of view of the operators, of the providers, and all of the financing system, let's say. Because let me take the example of Orange. Orange has made some strong commitments to reduce its GHG emissions, minus 45% in 2030 compared to 2020. So this is a very important challenge, in particular in the markets where we are developing new networks, like in Africa and Middle East. And to get the possibility to achieve this, we need common rules. We need to have common ways to account for the GHG emissions. We have seen that more and more the fundings, they will depend in some part on the results in terms of sustainability and in particular in terms of carbon footprint. In a short future, it may come also, and this was just mentioned, in terms of biodiversity impact, nature impact. And so we have seen that the trend to link the capability to obtain funding with ESG results. And we believe this trend will amplify in the coming future. And so in order to be able to prove our results, we need common standards. So this is why Orange is very active in the Green Digital Action, in all the efforts from ITUT, the Study Group 5, which particularly looks at GHG emissions accounting, environmental accounting in general. And this is why we have been part of the development of several key standards. I will give a few right now. I know that you have done a great job mapping all the standards that have been developed by ITUT on this topic. So let me give you two examples. There is L.1470, for instance, which is related to the trajectories necessary for the ICT sector to achieve a 1.5 degree trajectory, to make its part in order to reach what IPCC has asked the world to reach. So this was interestingly made not only by the ITUT, but also with SBTi, Science Based Target Initiative, which is the recognized initiative worldwide when we speak about companies' engagement in all sectors. And they decided to work with the ITU, to work with GSMA, JESI, and also the International Energy Agency to produce this key reference standard, which provides the necessary trajectories for the sectors. And then operators, they are using this when they set their targets. This is the first example, and the second example briefly is on Scope 3 emissions. We all know that the upstream and downstream emissions, GHG emissions, the ones corresponding to, for instance, all the equipment that an operator is purchasing from suppliers and the emissions coming from the use. These are the majority, the vast majority of the emissions. Often it's more than 80% of operators' emissions. And they are difficult to assess because these are related to other companies, and an operator has no direct control on that. And so it's very important to have cooperation. And we have built, in the frame of ITUT SG5, together with the GSMA and JESI, we have been built a common methodology for the ICT sector with specific explanation and guidance for the ICT sector on how to assess Scope 3 emissions. And I know the GSMA recently made a survey, and they found that many operators, a large number of operators, are actually using this standard. So we can have power, we can deliver on these standards, and for us it's very important.
Thank you very much, John. Well, I mean, it's a very holistic. You explained the whole thing from the top to the bottom and going to an actual implementation of the GHG framework that you did with the ITU-T study group 5. No, that's amazing. And actually, we're hearing, I mean, you heard from the international organization, from financing and development infrastructure organization, and also from an operator. I think it's now time for a vendor. So we'll talk about the global vendor for Huawei. So Salvador, I mean, how do you see, I mean, with all these discussions about the solutions, innovation, economic viability, green standards, what's Huawei's role in the international standards in balancing innovation and sustainability in emerging markets?
Thanks, Ahmed. So a large organization, multinational like Huawei, not only the breadth of technologies that we cover, but also the depth and the coverage in terms of global regions and countries that we operate in. So on the one hand, it's important for us to be able to help our customers achieve their targets, which tend to be driven by national targets. So we're seeing more and more now customer RFPs, including requirements for lower energy consumption, right? Now, the challenge and where standards come in is, so let me just step back and say, overall, the ICT sector's energy consumption is still relatively small, but it will increase, especially with more data centers and AI computing especially. So we need to keep that in mind, and this is the industry that we're in, so we need to do our part to address this bit of the equation. So within that, if we look across the major three categories, so you've got sensing technologies, the communication technologies, and then the data centers and computing technologies above that. Let me simplify it this way. Across all of these, when a vendor needs to look at, well, what is the direction of my R&D in terms of product development? This is where I think there is a great opportunity to have a closer discussion and know which direction standards are going in. I'll give you an example. When it comes to sensing technologies, right? There are n number of different ways of doing communication. Now, when you're investing, if there are too many options for which communication protocol to use, then you're either going to not do anything, or you're going to develop something that doesn't have a great business case behind it, right? Because you're not sure what people are going to use in a particular country. So on the one hand, standards and adoption in a country, so we know what's going to happen in that country related to sensing technology, for example, right? Then it becomes clearer for the vendors to know where to put their investment. Of course, when it comes to the energy and carbon side of it, that's generally driven either by companies' own ESG policies, but more and more we see from a country level strategy. So if especially operators or large technology vendors and companies that are working in that country, across all of it, if I'm a customer and I'm in the business of, let's say, airports, I'm going to have a lot of carbon generated from the fuel. My technology component of that is relatively small, right? However, I've still got, doesn't mean I should ignore it, right? I should be able to look into what's happening in terms of energy and carbon across everything that I do. And I think this is an important space. This is our domain in terms of technology. So we should be able to look at that, again, from the sensing side, the communication side, which is both the fixed and wireless side, and also from the data center and computing. And then we'll get into, how do we offset some of that, and Huawei's breadth of portfolio allows us to look at both sides of the equation in terms of reducing consumption or abatement, generating on site, and also managing the rest better, right? So we can break it down that way.
No, sure. I'll come back to you on this to break it down with a very practical example, hopefully. So Sarah, I'll come to you again with the very first point you made, which is very interesting, that sometimes we can use green standards or sustainability as actually a reason to be even more profitable or to open more business cases. So maybe my question to you now is, in developing countries mainly, what are the other challenges that you see in adopting these kind of green standards, if this is not a challenge? So what is the other challenge that you always see, and what kind of other opportunities maybe it can open for us?
Thank you so much. So maybe let's start with the opportunities, and I think Jean Manuel also framed these quite well. But basically it's about having a common language about what does green mean. There's lots of chat, there's climate, there's green goals, but it's just very fluffy. So if we don't have that common language, it's not possible to actually act on it. So for me and for the work we are doing, that's really essential to be able to, when we go to governments and have that dialogue with them, to be able to point to, this is what the world thinks is the good way of doing it. You might adapt it, but this is kind of the gold standard. We've been investing together with governments in digital infrastructure for quite a while and quite a lot of money. To be honest, it's first within the last few years that we've begun to have kind of a mainstream conversation with them on greening those investments. So, and we come to them, and it's not because they don't want to do that. They're like, that sounds reasonable. You're also saying it's good for my business, but what does it actually mean? So if we don't have those standards to point to, then it's a difficult conversation. So it's a starting point for that conversation. In terms of the challenges, maybe let me be a bit provocative. I think the number one challenge is knowing they exist, the standards. And that's when I speak with governments, that's where we start.
It's true.
They don't know where to start looking. I'm sure they know ITU is there's a website, but kind of going from there to, I have my procurement here, where do I start, how do I do it? There's a gap there. On our side, we are publishing a Green Standard 101 based on all the great work you've been doing. But I would like to see much more of that kind of easily digestible entry points for just even kind of navigating the standard landscape. So that's a plea to you also to work with us on that, because without that, it's just a nice website with some very, very long, complicated documents. We need ways of kind of making them actionable in many different contexts. And that leads me to my next point, and that's really the relevance. Because there's kind of the gold standard, and then there's what's practical to implement. And finding some way in between, I think really is kind of the ideal. You might see it differently, but that's what I see as an ideal, especially in the countries that I work in. And I think the regional working groups that ITU also has on standards in different regions are incredibly important to kind of source the needs and the reality and feed them into how you develop the standards, but also as a source of communication. And beyond communicating, I think there is a need for capacity building in terms of how to adopt these standards to many different local contexts and into local legislation and so forth. So that right now, I think there's still a big gap in like how is that capacity building done. And then my third challenge is a bit of a boring one. My kids, they think we go to governments and speak about AI and cool stuff, but what we really do is speak about procurement. Really, really boring procurement. So, and how to integrate standards into procurement is one of the challenges we're facing at the moment. For us, the ideal is having technology neutral procurements and kind of putting very specific standards in. Sometimes our clients think that that's going to hamper the ability to have technology neutral tenders. So finding ways of putting in kind of objectives, like goals, but that vendors can meet in different ways, not necessarily by like very technical specifications. That's also a challenge that we're looking at how to address that, and would also encourage more work together with you on that.
Thank you, Sarah. No, great points. And I mean, we don't find standards, but you know the standards pavilion now, where
Yes.
you know how to find. So that's a good thing. But we're going to discuss about this for sure. And you said the relevance as well, the relevance of standards, and also the idea of the procurement on this part, which might relate to Scope 3 in a way, in a very big sense. So I'll go back to Marco on this, talk about standards that people like governments or private sector, sometimes actually different financing group might not know about or not know they are there or they're not that relevant. From an infrastructure perspective, what is the most relevant or critical standards you think or you look at when it comes to sustainable impact for ICT projects?
So from an investment in infrastructure perspective, we would be bound by the standards that regulate financial investors. And so ultimately we rely on the standards in the sector for the credibility of the data that comes. Because so if you take GHG emissions, then there are very articulated rules about what I would put on my disclosures, which is based on how you are calculating that in the project, which is reliant on the standards themselves. So the credibility of those standards and the transferability of those standards is key. So greenhouse gas emissions and everything that was mentioned before around scope 1, 2, and 3, and how that is calculated is absolutely key. The other thing which is very important and for which there isn't a standard from an infrastructure investment perspective is climate risk. And that is one of the most important considerations that we have. Now, it doesn't look at the mitigation side, but actually where we are working, and given the extreme climate vulnerability of where we're working, that is important both at the level of the asset and at the level of the population. Because digital infrastructure can have a very direct impact on climate resilience of the population only if it is itself climate resilient. And at the moment we are not seeing common language on that, or common measures on that, and so we need to rely on our own assessment. And by the way, that is what would allow us to then classify our investments in ICT as climate finance, because at the moment they're not. Renewable energy is, but even emission reduction is very difficult to classify that as climate finance in Article 9 fund or other disclosures. So I think definitely the standardization of emission accounting, plus some common language around physical climate risks and climate resilience of the asset and the impact of that infrastructure on the climate resilience on the population is what we're looking at. Going a bit further, then there will be biodiversity and nature, and there will be overall inclusion. Again, this will be winners, in my view, for digital infrastructure done well in emerging markets, because you will be able to account for additional positive impacts that at the moment are totally discounted.
No, it's great points, Mark. Actually, I took some points from that. Maybe you need to think about it for the next working group after COP29 to work on it, this kind of aspects and approaches. I think you come from a very practical, let's say, perspective, which gives us a lot to talk about.
Or very ignorant about the standards, maybe.
No, very practical. No, not at all. Exactly, no, not at all. Actually, the other way around. So I'll go now to Orange and Jamal. Well, I mean, we talked about, talked about biodiversity, nature, climate risk, all these kind of things. So from an enablement perspective, I know, again, you're very active on the GHG. So how does Orange approach to climate action in regards to the GHG pillar and the Green Digital Action initiative, and also the enablement aspect of ICT solution, and what role of standards can play in that?
Okay, so to answer you on the first question, that is to say the GHG emissions pillar, for us it's very important that all the ecosystem moves in the same direction. So this is why we are part of this pillar, and we believe that it's very important to have this platform to exchange on best practices with other operators, with vendors, which we have been doing for 1 year and the year before as well, and we hope to continue and to make even more impact on that. So that's key for us, that our vendors, for instance, they do set targets, and they have been setting targets, that they do let's say, evaluate their emissions in a common standards way, and we are all playing together in this field. And also that they publish transition plans that they are able to improve year after year. And what we expect in these transition plans, it's of course some mitigation actions, but also adaptation actions. And so I would like to stress very much what you have said. It's very important that transition plans from the operators, like from the vendors, but in particular for the operators, they do include the adaptation part. We have seen recently in many regions, lastly in Valencia, how important it is to have a resilient infrastructure to have a well-prepared communication. We understand that may have failed in Valencia to some extent, a prepared organization, but we need adequate technical support, resilient, and we need to have also some capabilities to face this kind of events. To give you an example, Orange teams in Paris, in charge of events of the Olympic Games, they very quickly, the day after, sent some specific equipment to Valencia region in order to set up some Wi-Fi on the location to be able to perform the operations for firemen and all the rescue team that were operating, because everything had been destroyed. So this is very important for us, this adaptation part on top of the mitigation part. And relatively to the enablement, we are coming back to the topic we were discussing. That is to say, if we want to be credible, we have to use, let's say collectively, some credible methodologies to assess the enablement effect of ICT. We know we are challenged because we know with artificial intelligence, the energy use of data centers is projected to increase very largely. We know there are very good solutions from artificial intelligence that help mitigate or adapt to climate evolution, to biodiversity loss. But at the same time, we know there are many other usages of artificial intelligence. We are challenged, we will be challenged. And so it's very important that collectively, in my opinion, the sector is able to have, in an actionable way, some standards that can help assess the benefits of using digital services. Would it be to optimize electricity network? Would it be to optimize buildings operations? Or would it be to identify the artificial intelligence solutions that are really helping on these topics? So this is why we have worked on that. There is a standard L1480, again developed by SG5, which is currently under review with ETSI and IoT, for instance, to make it even more actionable.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And talking about actions and actionable, I would move to a vendor now that creates the product and solution. So, Safder, I mean, we talk about actionable implementation of standards. Can you give us an example of a successful implementation where Huawei did on for a global standard on the product or solution level?
Sure. So I think there's some very good points raised by the panelists here, and let me try and bring all of those together, because from our perspective, one of the things I lead in Huawei is the Net Zero Campus initiative. Now, why do we call it Net Zero Campus? Because from our perspective, every customer that we come across has a campus, whether that's a telecom operator, a school, a hospital, or so on. And the way we define a campus is that a facility or group of facilities that come under a single operational management. Now, if every campus can be net zero, our cities and countries will achieve their targets faster. So that's why we approach the net zero campus as a solution set, which from Huawei's perspective, because on the one hand, when we look at the technology side, you've got energy consumption, and how do we reduce that? Secondly, as I mentioned earlier, we are also the largest provider of solar inverters, so we can help our customers reduce generate on site, especially at a campus scale, because you've got a fixed rooftop area or a fixed area. Yeah. So the more efficient your inverters and batteries are, the more energy you can generate. And at the same time, you can reduce some of your consumption through different architectures as well as technologies. Then the gap of the remaining becomes smaller, and then manage the rest better. So if I break those down from the consumption side in terms of network technology, I'm talking within buildings now primarily, is that we've largely moved away from a traditional 3-tier architecture to a 2-tier architecture. And that could be all fiber or through a hybrid copper cable, which Huawei has innovated. And this removes that limitation where traditionally if you had a building, you'd have IDF rooms on every floor. Well, you don't need them anymore, right? Because you can run either the hybrid cable up to 1.9 kilometers or with full fiber as long as you like, pretty much, right? So this means that not only are you removing those power and cooling rooms, IDF rooms on every floor, you're also freeing up square foot space that can be utilized better in the design of the building. Right? And that redesign, that square foot space is generally quite expensive and probably pay for the technology for the coming lifetime of the technology itself. Then, of course, there's the data centers that may well be on site, and there's a number of technologies around there. Some of them that we take actually from the carrier side of the business. For example, the tower cabinets that might be on a rooftop, redesigned in a modular way, and the actual materials used are using free air cooling techniques, which can be applied in the data center as well. And then when it comes to Wi-Fi, my colleague mentioned about Wi-Fi, so what we're doing here is in the network management, we're using tidal flow algorithms to power down the equipment when it's not in use. So the ultimate target being that if there's zero data, there's 0 watts, right? And we can get very close to that because when we have a Wi-Fi network, let's say we had all of this floor here, we're powering down all of the devices except for a few what we call sentinel devices, which are listening out in case there's a user comes in, and then we can power up based on the need. I won't go too much into the solar side, but yes, we can help our customers generate on site, and then they manage the rest better. Now here, what we're doing is in our network management software called iMaster NCE Campus Insight. When I came to learn about L1333, the Network Carbon Intensity Index, I thought, what a great idea. And I spoke to my colleagues and said, can we use it in the enterprise network, not just the carrier? And they said, don't see why not. We maybe need to talk instead into gigabytes rather than terabytes, so we made this adjustment with our R&D, and I'm happy to say that I believe we are the first vendor to have implemented L1333 in our network management globally, publicly available in general release from Q1 this year. So all of our customers have access to that. And in there, not only are we giving the energy or power saving techniques, but also giving them the real-time carbon footprint. And also if I've got multiple sites, because I've got the Network Carbon Intensity Index, I can see how well each site is doing against each other. So I think it's been a great innovation to have that, and to be able to implement it and then help our customers on their journey towards net zero in the capacity that we can. So Net Zero Campus, I think, is very applicable and makes it easy for any customer to be able to get involved, understand, and the standard part, which may well be related, already been taken care of within the network. So I hope it leads the way for other vendors to follow suit as well.
Thank you very much, Shavdar. I think this is like an ending on a high note. I mean, with a real practical implementation of an actual L1333 ITU-T SELEC Group 5 standard in a product and solution level. So again, thank you very much, everyone. Thanks very much, Sarah Bannon from the World Bank, Shavdar from Huawei, Marco from PIDG, and John Melwell from Orange. Thank you very much. You can still be here, by the way. I'm just going to say 1 or 2 minutes announcement of the outcomes of the GDA standards pillar, and then we're going to give it back to Rihanna, who would again to Dr. Bilal Jamouzi to give the closing remarks. So quickly, the announcement of the Green Digital Action standards pillar is very interesting to say it right now without a slide, because it needs a matrix, so I need your imagination with me. So the thing is, throughout last year, we have been discussing what are the domains of the ICT industry. Like if there's an ICT industry, how can we divide this into different domains? Like what's the domains that would define the digital industry or digital technology industry? And you can imagine 40 plus partners on calls discussing how to define that. It was amazing, huh? In a good way. And we discussed a lot of things about it. How can we define this? And we decided that there's going to be 6 technical domains. So we have the hardware part, the software part, the networking part, data center, cloud, and AI. These are the 6 technical domains that the group in GDA standards pillar decided to kind of map the standards accordingly. And then we decided to define 4 operational domains where the standards operate under. And the 4 operational domains that we have been decided or have been decided throughout the year I think 8 e-meetings we had, were compliance and governance, operational, energy management, operational area, and enablement, and environmental sustainable impact. So we ended up with 6 technical domains, 4 operational areas. So we built the matrix basically. And then we had the 157 identified green standards from international organizations, including ITU, ISO, IEC, and IEEE from last year at COP28 through GDA. We sent this survey of the 157 standards to standards experts. We got few but very high quality responses. So we had like 7 standardization experts give us responses on where to place each of these standards on this matrix. And the results were amazing. So we got amazing results of a matrix 6x4. So you can say, for example, for implementation projects or people not knowing which standard to implement for a government, for example, you can say, I'm a government, I want to check the cloud standards on energy management. And you get the set of standards from international organization, this you should be compliant to. Or hardware on enablement, and you get that, for example. And it's very interesting because you can see how many standards are overpopulated in one area, and where there's some gaps that we need to work on some work in it. So this is the first action point that will be announced out of the GDA standards pillar today. It's going to be on the GDA website, the table and the matrix. You can see the standards identified. The second point, or the second announcement is, we're going to have a working group, or continue the working group out of this COP, to have more standards into this matrix, or to update the matrix, or to even expand this to other areas. So make it easier to find the standards and make sure that it's relevant to certain areas, right? That's the second announcement. And I think the third one is we try to have your help to promote this survey, to get more people to try to help us label and kind of identify this kind of standards across this matrix. We work very closely with the other pillars like GHG pillar and other pillars of the GDA. We have also, I think, the green computing pillar, and we have the enablement pillar. So all this works with the GDA. So again, with this, I would end this session. And thanks again for the speakers. It was a very insightful one. I think we can continue. And back to you, Reina. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ahmed. Did I say that it was a dynamic session, right? It was. So, nice commitment, Ahmed. And the most important is that this commitment will come through COP30, that we have to be prepared for Brazil. So this is important for you to know that the work doesn't stop here. The work continues. Now, I want to give the floor to the Deputy Director of the Telecommunications Standardization Bureau, Mr. Bilal Jamousi, for closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Reina. I was thinking, as hearing all the speakers, how to kind of summarize this and put it in the context of why we're here at COP29. And remembering at the beginning of this week when I was hearing the statements from presidents and prime ministers of countries who are at risk of extinction because of the climate change. Small island development states who really, the water is rising and their livelihood is at stake. Their existence is at stake. We heard today from the young professional from Mongolia how his family had to move to the city because the livestock died because of the cold weather that has been enhanced tremendously by the climate change. So we're not talking about abstract topics, we're talking about the livelihood of people around the world and the impact of the rising temperature in the world because of the climate change and because of the greenhouse gas emission. So if we take it from that point and see why the Green Digital Action was initiated last COP28 is because of the conviction of the collective digital ecosystem that we have a role to play and that the negotiators here at COP29 need to be aware, back to Sarah's point, of people not being aware of standards and how the cascading effect going from the negotiations at COP at the highest level of government to then putting policies in place that can be acted upon. And how can you act upon those policies and decisions is through international standards. So for instance, if you set certain limits of emission for the country, then the government will ask the operators, in the case of network operators, data centers operators, all the digital ecosystem on how they can reduce their greenhouse gas emission. And then the operator needs to translate that into the vendor that is producing and developing equipment so that the products that are going to be put in the network or the data center, and as Ahmed categorized the 6 categories and the 4 dimensions, how can we all collectively agree on how to implement it? And so we heard from the standards experts on the various standards that we have in-house in ITUT as a product of Study Group 5 in terms of measuring the impact of networks, measuring the greenhouse gas emission of products, services, networks, data centers, and also the e-waste and the electronic waste and the circularity in the design of equipment. Because if the e-waste is dumped in on the ground, it's going to have toxic impact on the water resources, on the biodiversity of the people living in those areas. So hopefully, this is a way to kind of summarize what we've been talking about and putting in the context of the livelihood of people, of the COP28 when we started this, now COP29, and then going to COP30. Hopefully this raises the awareness with the standards pavilion here that standards play an important role in this conversation around the climate change and how to work on enablement, how to work on mitigation, and how to work on adaptation when we have issues in terms of natural hazards, and how we can use AI, imaging, and new techniques to really, and different networking, emergency response of networking with Wi-Fi or satellites or other means to ensure that we can adapt very quickly to the issues of climate. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Bilal. Great summary, great highlights. Good for Twitter. I hope you also do Twitter. You can tweet all this session. So before we close, very quick, because it was the closing remarks, can you please share your thoughts about the session? Can you please scan the QR code and tell us what did you think about the session? You have a few seconds, and then the session will be closed, and we will take a picture. And maybe we can also take a picture of the whole group, because we are a petit comité, so maybe it will be nice to have also a group picture. Thank you.
Group picture?
Well done. Mateo.